Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most revolting romantic rituals in human history. A practice so disgusting that you'll probably never complain about your own dating anxieties again. Picture this. You're standing in a Roman villa around 150 CE. The marble floors cool beneath your sandaled feet, and you're watching a wealthy patrician prepare for what might be the most important dinner party of his social season. The oil lamps flicker against the frescoed walls, casting dancing shadows as he reaches for a small clay jar. Inside, fresh mouse brains, still warm and glistening. You probably won't survive hearing what he does next without gagging. But trust me, this gets much worse before it gets better. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing our global bedtime community come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're witnessing something that would make modern dentists weep. The systematic rubbing of rodent brain matter directly onto human gums. This wasn't some fringe practice performed by desperate outcasts. This was mainstream Roman medical advice, prescribed by respected physicians, and followed by citizens across the social spectrum. The logic, twisted as it seems to your modern sensibilities, made perfect sense within the framework of ancient Roman medicine and their understanding of bodily humors. You watch as our patrician friend methodically applies the gray, sticky substance to his gum line, his face contorting slightly at the texture, but showing no real disgust. This is as routine to him as brushing your teeth is to you. The Romans believed that bad breath was caused by corrupted blood and putrid vapors rising from the stomach, and they were convinced that the warm, fresh brain matter of a mouse could somehow neutralize these internal toxins. Modern science would laugh at this theory, but remember, these were the same people who built aqueducts that still function today and created concrete that outlasts our contemporary versions. The practice wasn't limited to special occasions either. You're observing a culture where social reputation could be destroyed by a single whiff of offensive breath during an important conversation. Roman society was built on close personal interactions, dining while reclining next to fellow guests, intimate political discussions, and elaborate social rituals that required people to speak directly into each other's faces. In a world without modern mouthwash, breath mints, or even basic understanding of oral bacteria, desperate times called for desperate measures. What makes this even more fascinating is how the Romans approached the procurement of their mouse brains. You wouldn't just grab any random rodent. Oh no, that would be barbaric. Proper Roman medical texts specified that the mice should be young, healthy, and preferably caught in grain storage areas where they'd been feeding on the finest wheat and barley. The brain extraction required specific timing too. The mouse had to be killed immediately before use to ensure maximum potency of the organic material. Historians still argue whether this practice originated from Roman medical innovation or was borrowed from conquered territories, but what's undeniable is how widespread it became. Archaeological evidence from across the Roman Empire shows tiny bone fragments and specialized small animal butchering tools in contexts that suggest medical rather than culinary use. You're looking at a practice that spanned from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to the eastern provinces. Millions of people, over centuries, rubbing mouse brains on their gums before important social encounters. Social pressure to maintain fresh breath was so intense that wealthy Romans would employ specialized servants whose sole job was preparing these organic dental treatments. These servants, usually slaves with some medical training, would become experts in selecting the right mice, timing the brain extraction perfectly, and even developing personalized recipes that might include additional ingredients like crushed pearls or aromatic herbs to mask the inherent unpleasantness of the primary component. You're now transported deeper into the Roman medical establishment, where respected physicians with years of training are seriously debating the merits of various animal organs for oral hygiene. The scene shifts to the office of a medicus, a Roman doctor whose practice serves both wealthy patricians and middle-class citizens. Scrolls of medical texts line the walls. Surgical instruments glint on marble tables, and the air is thick with the smoke of burning incense meant to purify the healing space. The doctor, a man named Gaius Sempronius, because of course his name is Gaius, is consulting with a young senator who's desperate to make a good impression on a potential father-in-law. You watch as Gaius unfurls a scroll containing the collected wisdom of Greek and Roman medical authorities, his finger tracing along lines of text that describe increasingly bizarre remedies for what they termed foul mouth vapors. This isn't some backwoods folk medicine. This is the cutting edge of Roman healthcare, where trained professionals are prescribing rodent neurology with the same confidence that modern doctors prescribe antibiotics. The theoretical foundation for these treatments rested on the Roman understanding of the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They believed that bad breath resulted from an excess of hot, moist humors that created putrefaction in the mouth and throat. Mouse brains, being considered naturally cold and dry according to their medical classification system, were thought to counteract this imbalance. You're witnessing medical logic that, while completely wrong by modern standards, represented genuine attempts to understand and treat physiological problems. What's particularly disturbing is how methodical these physicians were in their approach. Gaius explains to his patient that the mouse brain treatment should be applied in specific patterns, circular motions along the gum line, followed by gentle pressing against the tongue, and finished with a thorough coating of the inner cheeks. The entire process should take no less than 10 minutes, during which the patient must avoid swallowing, obviously, and should breathe exclusively through the nose to prevent contamination of the oral treatment. The prescription gets more elaborate as you continue watching. Gaius recommends that the mouse brain application be performed twice daily for a full week before any important social engagement, with the final treatment occurring no more than 2 hours before the actual event. He also suggests combining the brain treatment with regular rinsing, using a mixture of wine and honey, though this pleasant-sounding addition must wait at least 30 minutes after the brain application to avoid neutralizing the therapeutic properties. Historians still argue whether Roman physicians actually believed in these treatments or were simply responding to patient demand for increasingly exotic remedies. But the medical literature from this period shows genuine theoretical development around these practices. You're reading, metaphorically, texts that classify different animals, organs, according to their supposed medical properties: mouse brains for breath, rabbit livers for stomach ailments, and dove hearts for emotional balance. This wasn't random superstition. It was systematic pseudoscience. The training process for these medical procedures was surprisingly rigorous. Young apprentice physicians would spend months learning proper animal selection, organ extraction techniques, and application methods. They studied anatomical texts that detailed the correspondence between animal organs and human ailments, memorized complex charts that mapped out optimal treatment timing based on lunar cycles and seasonal changes, and practiced their techniques on willing and paying volunteers from the lower classes. You observe a particularly unsettling aspect of this medical culture: the competitive nature of remedy innovation. Physicians would try to outdo each other by developing increasingly elaborate and disgusting treatments, believing that the more revolting a medicine was, the more powerful its healing properties must be. This led to an escalating arms race of gross-out medical procedures, with mouse brains representing just one point along a spectrum that included everything from crushed beetle shells to fermented fish entrails. The patient consultation process was remarkably similar to modern medical appointments, despite the horrifying nature of the prescribed treatments. Gaius takes a detailed history of his patient's social calendar, dietary habits, and previous breath-related embarrassments. He examines the patient's mouth, tongue, and teeth, making notes about the color and texture of various oral tissues. He even checks the patient's pulse and examines urine samples, believing that systemic health directly influenced breath quality. What makes this medical approach even more fascinating is how it intersected with Roman social hierarchies. Wealthy patients could afford daily mouse brain treatments prepared by skilled medical servants, while middle-class citizens might only indulge before major events, and the poor were left to improvise with whatever small animals they could catch themselves. You're witnessing a healthcare system where access to disgusting medical treatments became a marker of social status. You're now diving deep into the twisted logic that convinced an entire civilization that rodent neurology held the key to social success. The scene shifts to a Roman medical school, where earnest young students are taking careful notes as their instructor explains the scientific principles behind mouse brain therapy. The irony isn't lost on you. These future physicians are receiving what they believe to be cutting-edge medical education, complete with anatomical demonstrations and theoretical frameworks that would make modern scientists weep with laughter. The instructor, a distinguished physician named Marcus Anatomicus. I promise I'm not making these names up. Romans really were that literal. Begins his lecture by explaining the fundamental properties of mouse brains according to Roman medical theory. He holds up a tiny, glistening organ no larger than a grape pit, pointing out its supposed cooling and drying characteristics. According to Roman understanding, these properties directly counteracted the hot and moist conditions that caused bad breath, creating what they believed to be a perfect therapeutic balance. The students lean forward as Marcus explains the doctrine of signatures, a medical theory suggesting that the physical appearance and behavior of substances indicated their healing properties. Mouse brains, being small, concentrated, and housed within the skull, the seat of intelligence and sensory perception, were thought to possess concentrated power over human oral sensations. You're watching future doctors absorb completely fabricated science with the same intensity that modern medical students study actual biochemistry. What's particularly fascinating is how Roman physicians attempted to classify different types of mouse brains according to their supposed potency. Field mice, having lived more natural lives, were considered superior to house mice. Young mice were preferred over old ones because their brains were thought to contain more vital essence. Pregnant female mice were considered the ultimate source, as their brains supposedly contained concentrated reproductive energy that could enhance not just breath freshness, but also general attractiveness and charisma. The preparation methodology was surprisingly sophisticated, given how ridiculous the underlying premise was. Marcus demonstrates the proper technique for brain extraction, using small bronze instruments designed specifically for this purpose. The brain must be removed within minutes of the mouse's death, he explains, because the therapeutic properties begin degrading immediately upon exposure to air. The organ should then be gently mashed with a small pestle made from polished marble, never wood or iron, as these materials were thought to contaminate the brain's natural properties. Historians still argue whether Roman physicians genuinely believed in the biochemical explanations they provided for these treatments, but the surviving medical texts show remarkable consistency in their theoretical frameworks. You're reading documents that describe complex interactions between mouse brain compounds and human oral tissues, complete with detailed explanations of how different application techniques could maximize therapeutic effects. These weren't hasty folk remedies. They were elaborate medical protocols developed over generations of practice. The timing of mouse brain applications was governed by an intricate system of medical astrology and physiological theory. Marcus explains to his students that treatments should ideally be performed during the waning moon, when the body's natural moisture levels were lowest and most receptive to the brain's drying influence. Early morning applications were preferred because the stomach's overnight fasting period supposedly reduced the production of the putrid vapors that caused bad breath. You observe the development of specialized tools and techniques for mouse brain therapy. Roman medical supply merchants sold complete kits that included mouse traps designed to kill quickly and cleanly, extraction instruments sized for tiny rodent skulls, marble mortars for proper brain preparation, and even small silver spoons for precise application to the gums. These weren't crude, improvised tools. They were sophisticated medical equipment produced by skilled craftsmen who took pride in their contribution to Roman healthcare. The theoretical sophistication extended to detailed classifications of treatment effectiveness based on patient characteristics. Young patients required smaller doses applied more frequently, while older patients needed more intensive treatments to overcome what physicians believed were accumulated oral toxins. Women's treatments were modified to account for their supposedly different humoral balance, and patients of different social classes received varying recommendations based on their presumed dietary and lifestyle factors. What makes this medical theory even more absurd is how Roman physicians attempted to explain treatment failures. If a patient's breath didn't improve after mouse brain therapy, the problem was never with the treatment itself. It was attributed to improper application technique, contaminated brain material, poor timing, or the patient's failure to maintain proper dietary restrictions during the treatment period. You're witnessing the birth of medical gaslighting, where impossible treatments were defended through increasingly elaborate explanations of patient noncompliance. The educational process for mastering mouse brain therapy was remarkably thorough. Students practiced on cadavers, learning to identify the subtle visual and textural differences between fresh and degraded brain tissue. They memorized complex charts correlating mouse age, diet, and capture location with therapeutic potency. They even studied the anatomy of human oral tissues to understand supposedly optimal application sites for maximum absorption of the brain's beneficial properties. You're now witnessing the elaborate ceremony that preceded every important Roman social engagement, a ritual so detailed and time-consuming that it makes modern beauty routines look like hasty afterthoughts. The scene opens in the private chambers of a wealthy Roman matron named Livia, who's preparing for a dinner party that could determine her daughter's marriage prospects. The room is filled with servants, each specializing in different aspects of the grooming process, and you can smell the mixture of expensive perfumes, burning incense, and something far more unsettling that you're about to discover. The preparation ritual begins hours before the actual event, starting with what Romans called the purification phase. You watch as Livia's body slave, a young Greek woman trained specifically in cosmetic arts, begins by having her mistress rinse her mouth with warm wine mixed with crushed mint leaves. This pleasant beginning is merely the opening act in a drama that will soon take a decidedly disturbing turn. The wine rinse is supposed to open the oral passages and prepare them for the more intensive treatments to follow. Next comes the mouse procurement ceremony, which has its own elaborate protocols. A specialized servant, whose sole job is maintaining the household supply of therapeutic rodents, presents a selection of freshly caught mice for Livia's inspection. She examines each animal like a jeweler appraising gemstones, checking for signs of youth, health, and proper diet. The chosen mouse, a plump specimen that's been feeding on imported wheat from Egypt, is dispatched with a quick blow to the head, a method designed to preserve the brain's integrity. The brain extraction process unfolds with surgical precision. Using instruments that wouldn't look out of place in a modern medical facility, the servant carefully opens the tiny skull and removes the brain using a small silver probe. The organ, no larger than a pea, is placed on a marble dish where it's gently warmed over a small flame to enhance its supposed therapeutic properties. You're watching a procedure that combines elements of surgery, cooking, and religious ritual into something that defies easy categorization. Historians still argue whether the warming process was based on medical theory or practical considerations, but contemporary texts suggest that Romans believed heat activated the brain's vital essences while making the substance easier to apply. The warming is carefully controlled. Too much heat would supposedly destroy the therapeutic compounds, while too little would leave them dormant and ineffective. You're observing a culture that brought the same precision to mouse brain preparation that they applied to engineering aqueducts. The actual application ceremony is performed with religious solemnity. Livia reclines on a cushioned couch, while her servant uses a small ivory spatula to apply the warmed brain matter to her gums. The process follows a specific pattern, starting with the front teeth, moving methodically along the gum line, and finishing with gentle pressing motions to ensure proper absorption. Throughout this procedure, Livia maintains complete stillness, believing that any movement could disrupt the treatment's effectiveness. The timing of this ritual is crucial and coordinated with other aspects of the grooming process. While the mouse brain treatment sets on her gums, a process that takes exactly 20 minutes according to Roman medical texts, other servants are working on Livia's hair, applying cosmetics, and selecting jewelry. You're witnessing a choreographed dance of beauty preparation, where every element is timed to achieve maximum effect at the moment of the social gathering. What makes this ritual even more elaborate is the series of complementary treatments that accompany the mouse brain application. Livia's feet are soaking in warm water infused with rose petals. Her hair is being treated with a mixture of olive oil and crushed pearls, and her skin is being rubbed with a lotion made from honey and ground alabaster. The mouse brain treatment isn't an isolated procedure. It's one component in a comprehensive beauty regimen that could take an entire afternoon to complete. The psychological aspects of this ritual are as important as the physical procedures. Livia uses this preparation time for mental preparation, reviewing the evening's guest list, rehearsing important conversational topics, and visualizing successful social interactions. The elaborate grooming process serves as a form of meditation, building confidence through the careful attention to every detail of personal presentation. You're observing how ancient beauty rituals functioned as both physical preparation and psychological armor for social combat. The cost of these preparation rituals was astronomical by ancient standards. A single mouse brain treatment, including the specialized servants, imported ingredients, and custom tools, could cost the equivalent of a skilled laborer's monthly wages. Wealthy Romans would sometimes spend more on pre-party grooming than middle-class families earned in an entire year. You're witnessing a level of beauty spending that makes modern luxury cosmetics look positively economical. The social pressure surrounding these rituals was intense enough to drive families into debt. Roman literature from this period includes numerous references to families selling property, borrowing money, or even selling slaves to fund elaborate grooming sessions for important social events. The fear of appearing at a gathering with inferior breath treatment was so powerful that it drove otherwise rational people to financial ruin. You're looking at the ancient equivalent of keeping up with the Kardashians, except with significantly more rodent neurology involved. You're now exploring how Roman society's rigid class structure created a hierarchy of disgusting dental practices, where your social status determined not just the quality of your mouse brains, but the entire elaborate support system surrounding their application. The scene shifts between different Roman households, from the marble-columned villas of senators to the cramped apartments above shops in the Suburra, Rome's working-class district. What you discover is a complex social ecosystem where even the most revolting medical practices became markers of wealth and status. At the pinnacle of Roman society, you observe the aristocratic approach to mouse brain therapy in the household of Senator Gaius Maximus. His personal physician, trained in Alexandria and Athens, maintains detailed records of brain potency based on the mice's breeding, diet, and astrological conditions at the time of capture. The senator's mice live in specially constructed habitats, fed premium grain imported from Egypt, and monitored by servants who track their health with the same attention modern pet owners give to prize-winning show dogs. When it's time for brain extraction, the procedure is performed with surgical instruments made from the finest metals in a dedicated room designed specifically for medical preparations. The senator's treatment protocol involves not just mouse brains, but a complex cocktail of complementary ingredients. The brain matter is mixed with crushed pearls to enhance its supposed cooling properties, blended with honey from specific regions of Greece known for their aromatic qualities, and applied using instruments carved from ivory imported from Africa. You're witnessing a level of medical luxury that transforms a disgusting practice into an elaborate display of imperial wealth and sophistication. Moving down the social ladder, you encounter the merchant class approach to mouse brain therapy. Marcus Mercator, a successful grain trader, can afford regular treatments, but must make compromises that would horrify the aristocratic elite. His mice are locally sourced rather than specially bred. His extraction tools are made from bronze rather than precious metals, and his brain preparation involves standard honey rather than exotic varieties. Despite these limitations, Marcus takes enormous pride in maintaining what he considers a properly Roman approach to oral hygiene, and he looks down on those who cannot afford even these modest versions of aristocratic luxury. Middle-class Roman approach involves creative cost-cutting measures that sometimes border on the comical. Families pool resources to share specialized servants, creating neighborhood cooperatives where a single trained mouse brain preparer serves multiple households. You observe elaborate scheduling systems where families book treatment appointments weeks in advance, and social calendars are coordinated to ensure that the most important events receive priority access to the freshest brain preparations. These middle-class Romans have developed their own status symbols, competing over who can secure the most skilled preparation services and the highest quality mice within their limited budgets. Historians still argue whether the working classes actually participated in mouse brain therapy or simply claimed to do so for social acceptability. But archaeological evidence suggests that even relatively poor Romans found ways to participate in these practices. In the Subura, you discover a thriving underground economy of brain preparation services, where skilled former slaves offer simplified versions of aristocratic treatments at prices the working classes can afford. These budget brain therapists operate from small workshops, using shared equipment and standardized procedures to serve customers who save for weeks to afford a single treatment before major social occasions. The most fascinating aspect of this class-based system is how different social levels developed entirely different theories about optimal mouse brain therapy. Aristocrats believed in complex multi-day preparation, rituals involving astronomical timing and exotic additives. Merchants focused on practical effectiveness, developing streamlined procedures that balanced cost with social expectations. Working-class practitioners emphasized accessibility, creating simplified methods that ordinary people could learn and perform themselves without expensive equipment or specialized training. You observe how these class distinctions created intense social anxiety around mouse brain authenticity. Romans lived in constant fear that their treatment quality would reveal their true social status during important gatherings. Wealthy citizens would sometimes publicly discuss their mouse sources and preparation methods as a form of social signaling, while those with more modest means developed elaborate lies about their treatment protocols to maintain their social facades. The Roman dinner party became a battlefield where breath quality served as a marker of both personal hygiene and economic status. The competitive aspect of these class distinctions led to increasingly absurd displays of mouse brain sophistication. Aristocratic Romans began commissioning custom-designed mouse habitats complete with miniature architecture and landscaping, to demonstrate their commitment to optimal brain quality. Wealthy matrons would casually mention their mice's genealogies during social conversations, treating rodent breeding with the same seriousness that modern wine enthusiasts bring to discussing vintage characteristics. You're witnessing the birth of luxury consumption around practices that would make modern people physically ill. The social pressure created by these class distinctions was so intense that Romans would go to extraordinary lengths to conceal their true treatment quality. Middle-class citizens borrowed expensive preparation equipment for important occasions. Working-class Romans pooled money to purchase single high-quality treatments for major social opportunities. And even slaves would sometimes steal mice from their master's supplies to improve their own oral hygiene before important servant gatherings. The entire Roman social structure became organized around elaborate deceptions, designed to hide the true quality of everyone's mouse brain access. What makes this class-based system even more remarkable is how it created entirely different medical theories based on economic circumstances. Aristocratic physicians developed complex explanations for why expensive treatments were more effective, while working-class practitioners created alternative theories that justified their simpler approaches. You're observing the birth of class-based pseudoscience, where medical facts were tailored to support whatever treatment options different social groups could actually afford. The result was a Roman Empire where your social status determined not just your access to mouse brains, but your entire understanding of how mouse brains supposedly worked. You're now entering the hidden world of Roman women's beauty culture, where mouse brain therapy represented just one element in a comprehensive system of appearance enhancement that would make modern beauty routines seem quaint by comparison. The scene opens in the private chambers of wealthy Roman matrons, spaces that functioned as elaborate laboratories where women experimented with increasingly outrageous cosmetic procedures, all hidden from male scrutiny behind walls decorated with frescoes of Greek goddesses and Persian gardens. The women's approach to mouse brain therapy differed dramatically from male practices in both sophistication and secrecy. While men treated it as a straightforward medical procedure, women developed elaborate enhancement techniques that combined brain application with other beauty treatments to create comprehensive appearance improvement systems. You observe Cornelia, wife of a prominent senator, receiving what her servants call the complete Venus preparation, a multi-hour process that begins with mouse brain therapy, but incorporates dozens of additional procedures designed to enhance every aspect of her physical presentation. The female version of mouse brain preparation involves significantly more sophisticated ingredient combinations. Women discovered that mixing mouse brains with crushed rose petals not only masked the unpleasant odor, but supposedly enhanced the romantic effectiveness of the treatment. They developed complex recipes that incorporated everything from powdered seashells for teeth whitening to aromatic herbs that were believed to make their breath not just fresh, but actively seductive. You're witnessing the birth of cosmetic chemistry, where Roman women were conducting crude but systematic experiments in beauty enhancement centuries before the development of modern cosmetic science. What makes the women's approach particularly fascinating is how they created an entirely separate knowledge system around mouse brain therapy, passed down through networks of female servants, friends, and family members. This women's medical tradition operated parallel to official Roman medicine, developing its own theories about optimal treatment timing, ingredient combinations, and application techniques. Mothers taught daughters specialized preparation methods that had been refined over generations, creating family traditions around practices that official medical texts barely acknowledged. The social dynamics of women's mouse brain culture were remarkably complex. Wealthy matrons would host beauty gatherings where groups of women would receive treatments together, sharing gossip and advice while their servants performed the various procedures. These events functioned as informal medical conferences where women compared treatment results, shared recipe modifications, and debated the relative merits of different mouse sources. You're observing the creation of a female-dominated medical specialty that existed entirely outside official Roman healthcare systems. Historians still argue whether women's enhanced mouse brain techniques were actually more effective than standard male procedures. But surviving personal letters between Roman women suggest that they believed their methods produced superior results. Women's treatments typically involved longer application times, more complex ingredient combinations, and careful attention to complementary procedures that enhanced overall oral health. The female approach treated mouse brain therapy as one component in a holistic beauty system rather than an isolated medical procedure. The secrecy surrounding women's enhanced beauty practices created a thriving underground economy of specialized female servants who commanded premium wages for their expertise in mouse brain preparation and application. These women, usually Greek or Egyptian slaves with medical training, became highly valued household assets who were sometimes worth more than skilled craftsmen or educated tutors. You're witnessing the development of female-dominated professional specialties that operated entirely within the domestic sphere, but required sophisticated technical knowledge. The psychological aspects of women's mouse brain culture were as important as the physical procedures. The elaborate preparation rituals served as female bonding experiences, creating social networks that extended across class lines and family connections. Women would discuss their treatment experiences with the same intensity that men devoted to political debates, sharing detailed analyses of ingredient effectiveness, servant skill levels, and optimal timing strategies. These conversations functioned as a form of medical education that existed entirely outside formal Roman educational systems. Women also developed their own system of quality assessment that was far more sophisticated than male approaches. While men focused primarily on the mice's basic health and diet, women created elaborate classification systems that considered factors like the animal's emotional state, breeding history, and astrological conditions at capture. Female mouse brain connoisseurs could allegedly detect subtle differences in brain quality that were invisible to male practitioners, leading to a female-dominated market for premium mouse brain preparation services. The competitive aspects of women's mouse brain culture were intense, but operated according to different rules than male competition. Rather than openly displaying treatment quality, women engaged in subtle forms of social signaling that allowed initiated members of the beauty community to recognize superior preparation methods without alerting male observers to the sophisticated nature of female cosmetic practices. You're observing the development of a complex female social code that allowed women to compete over beauty practices while maintaining the appearance of modest simplicity that Roman culture demanded from respectable matrons. What makes this women's culture even more remarkable is how it created innovations that eventually influenced broader Roman medical practices. Several treatment enhancements that originated in female beauty culture were later adopted by male physicians and incorporated into official medical texts. Women were essentially conducting systematic research into cosmetic medicine, developing new techniques and refining existing procedures through careful observation and experimentation. You're witnessing female-driven medical innovation that occurred centuries before women were officially permitted to participate in Roman medical education. You're now examining the surviving written evidence that proves this wasn't just isolated weirdness, but a documented medical practice endorsed by the Roman Empire's most respected physicians. The scene shifts to the dusty libraries of Pompeii, Alexandria, and Rome itself, where scrolls of medical texts contain detailed instructions for mouse brain therapy, written with the same clinical precision that modern medical journals use to describe surgical procedures. These aren't folklore collections or religious texts. They're serious medical manuals written by trained physicians for other medical professionals. The most comprehensive source is a text attributed to Scribonius Largus, a Roman physician who served Emperor Claudius and wrote extensively about oral medicine. His work, Compositions, contains an entire section devoted to what he terms cerebral rodent therapy for oral purification. You're reading instructions that specify not just the basic procedure, but elaborate details about mouse selection, brain extraction timing, and post-treatment care that reads like a modern surgical protocol. Scribonius treats mouse brain application with the same clinical seriousness that contemporary medical texts devote to heart transplant procedures. The written evidence reveals a level of medical systematization that's both impressive and horrifying. Roman medical texts classify mice according to detailed taxonomies that consider age, diet, capture location, and seasonal factors that that supposedly influence brain potency. One surviving papyrus from Alexandria contains charts that correlate mouse characteristics with human patient types, recommending different brain preparation methods for children versus adults, men versus women, and patients with different constitutional temperaments. You're looking at what amounts to a comprehensive textbook of rodent neurology written by people who had no understanding of actual neurology. What's particularly disturbing is how these medical texts describe mouse brain therapy as a routine treatment option, alongside genuinely beneficial procedures like wound cleaning and bone setting. The authors display no awareness that they're recommending something disgusting and medically useless to them. Mouse brains are simply another tool in the physician's arsenal, as normal and necessary as surgical instruments or herbal medicines. You're reading documents that treat revolting pseudoscience as established medical fact, written by intelligent people who genuinely believed they were advancing human health. The surviving texts also reveal extensive scholarly debate about optimal mouse brain therapy techniques. Different physicians advocated for different preparation methods, application timing, and complementary treatments, leading to academic controversies that were recorded in formal medical literature. You can read actual scholarly arguments about whether mouse brains should be applied warm or at room temperature, whether the treatment was more effective during certain lunar phases, and whether different mouse species produced superior therapeutic results. These physicians were conducting what they believed to be legitimate medical research on completely fabricated treatments. Historians still argue whether these medical texts reflect genuine physician beliefs or were written to satisfy patient expectations, but the clinical detail and theoretical sophistication suggest that many Roman doctors actually believed in mouse brain therapy's effectiveness. The texts include case studies describing successful treatments, theoretical explanations for how mouse brains supposedly worked, and detailed warnings about potential complications from improper application. You're reading medical literature that treats mouse brain therapy as seriously as modern texts discuss antibiotic protocols. The geographic distribution of these medical texts shows that mouse brain therapy wasn't limited to Rome itself, but was practiced throughout the Mediterranean world. Surviving documents from Egypt, Greece, Spain, and Britain all contain variations of mouse brain treatment protocols, suggesting that this practice spread throughout the Roman Empire as part of standard medical training. Provincial physicians were learning these techniques in medical schools and applying them to patients from Britain to North Africa. You're looking at evidence of empire-wide medical standardization around practices that were completely bogus. Some of the most detailed evidence comes from medical papyri discovered in Egyptian garbage dumps, where discarded documents have been preserved by the desert climate. These everyday medical records show routine mouse brain prescriptions alongside treatments for broken bones, fevers, and digestive problems. The papyri include shopping lists for medical supplies that casually mention fresh mice for brain extraction, alongside legitimate medical ingredients like honey and wine. You're seeing documentary evidence that mouse brain procurement was as routine for Roman physicians as ordering bandages or antiseptics is for modern doctors. The written evidence also reveals the economic aspects of mouse brain medicine through detailed records of medical expenses and insurance claims. Some surviving accounts show payments to specialized mouse suppliers, fees for brain extraction services, and reimbursements for mouse brain treatments provided to military personnel and government officials. The Roman bureaucracy was actually funding mouse brain therapy as part of official healthcare benefits, treating it as a legitimate medical expense worthy of public support. Perhaps most remarkably, the medical texts include detailed instructions for training new physicians in mouse brain therapy techniques. Student physicians had to demonstrate competency in mouse selection, brain extraction, and application methods before they could practice independently. Medical schools included mouse brain therapy in their standard curricula, and licensing examinations tested physicians' knowledge of optimal treatment protocols. You're reading evidence of formalized medical education around practices that were based on complete fantasy, taught by respected professors to students who went on to become prominent physicians throughout the Roman world. The theoretical sophistication of these medical texts is genuinely impressive, even though the underlying premise was completely wrong. Roman physicians developed elaborate explanations for how mouse brains supposedly interacted with human physiology, created detailed classifications of treatment effectiveness, and conducted what they believed to be systematic research into optimal therapeutic protocols. You're seeing evidence of scientific methodology applied to pseudoscientific practices, resulting in sophisticated documentation of treatments that were utterly worthless, but represented genuine attempts at medical advancement. You're now descending into an even deeper level of Roman medical madness, where mouse brains were just the beginning of a vast pharmacological nightmare that included every conceivable animal organ and bodily fluid that desperate Romans were willing to rub on their gums. The scene opens in the workshop of Gaius Experimentus, a Roman physician who specialized in what he called exotic oral therapeutics, a polite way of describing his obsession with finding increasingly disgusting substances to put in people's mouths. The shelves of his workshop read like a horror movie prop department. Jars filled with rabbit kidneys floating in wine, dried snake livers ground into powder, fermented fish bladders preserved in honey, and containers of what he delicately terms processed bird neural matter. That's songbird brains to you and me. You're witnessing the ancient equivalent of a mad scientist's laboratory, except this mad scientist has paying customers and the full endorsement of Roman medical authorities. Gaius explains his theoretical framework with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believes he's revolutionizing healthcare. According to his system, Different animals possess different vital essences that can be transferred to humans through direct oral contact. Rabbits, being naturally timid, supposedly transfer courage-enhancing properties that help patients speak confidently in social situations. Foxes, known for their cunning, provide intelligence-boosting compounds that make conversation more witty and engaging. You're listening to a grown man with medical training seriously explaining why he believes animal personality traits can be absorbed through gum application. The preparation methods for these alternative ingredients make mouse brain therapy seem positively hygienic by comparison. Rabbit kidney treatment requires the organs to be buried in garden soil for exactly 7 days to mature their therapeutic properties, then dug up and applied directly to the gums while still covered in dirt. The theory is that earth exposure enhances the kidney's natural grounding effects, helping anxious patients feel more confident in social situations. You're watching a medical procedure that combines organ therapy with literal dirt eating, prescribed by someone who considers himself a sophisticated healthcare provider. Snake liver therapy involves even more elaborate preparation rituals. The snakes must be caught during specific lunar phases. Killed with bronze weapons, iron supposedly contaminates the liver's properties, and their livers extracted using tools blessed by priests of Asclepius, the Roman god of medicine. The livers are then dried in sunlight for exactly 13 days, no more, no less, before being ground into powder and mixed with imported honey from specific regions of Greece. You're observing medical procedures that blur the line between healthcare and religious ritual, performed by physicians who see no contradiction between scientific methodology and magical thinking. Historians still argue whether these alternative treatments were actually popular or represent the experimental fringe of Roman medicine, but surviving medical texts suggest that wealthy Romans were willing to try almost anything that promised social advantages. The competitive nature of Roman society created a market for increasingly exotic treatments, where the most disgusting procedures were often considered the most powerful. You're looking at a healthcare system where treatment effectiveness was measured by social shock value rather than actual medical outcomes. The bird brain therapy represents perhaps the most elaborate of these alternative treatments. Different songbird species supposedly provided different social benefits. Nightingale brains for beautiful speaking voices, parrot brains for conversational wit, and peacock brains for overall charismatic presence. The birds had to be caught at dawn during spring months, killed instantly to preserve their vocal essences, and their tiny brains extracted using specialized instruments that wouldn't contaminate the delicate neural tissue. You're witnessing medical procedures that required more skill and equipment than many legitimate surgical operations. What makes these alternative treatments even more disturbing is how they created elaborate supply chains throughout the Roman Empire. Specialized hunters provided exotic animals for medical use. Traveling merchants dealt in preserved organs and bodily fluids, and local physicians developed relationships with suppliers who could provide fresh ingredients on demand. The Roman economy included entire industries devoted to producing medically useless animal parts for people desperate enough to believe they would improve their social standing. The theoretical sophistication surrounding these treatments was remarkable. Roman physicians created detailed charts correlating animal characteristics with human personality traits, developed complex timing systems for optimal ingredient preparation, and conducted what they believed to be systematic research into treatment effectiveness. You're reading medical texts that classify the humor balance of different animal organs with the same precision that modern pharmaceutical companies use to describe drug interactions. The social pressure to try these alternative treatments was intense enough to drive otherwise rational Romans to financial ruin. Exotic animal therapy was significantly more expensive than basic mouse brain treatment, but the potential social benefits were supposedly proportionally greater. Wealthy Romans would sometimes spend the equivalent of a house down payment on a single course of peacock brain therapy, believing that the investment would pay off through improved social connections and business opportunities. The competitive aspect of alternative ingredient therapy created a medical arms race where physicians tried to outdo each other by discovering increasingly outrageous treatment protocols. Some doctors specialized in combinations that mixed multiple animal organs, creating therapeutic cocktails that supposedly provided comprehensive social enhancement. Others focused on extremely rare ingredients that were almost impossible to obtain, marketing exclusivity and scarcity as indicators of treatment potency. You're witnessing the birth of luxury healthcare marketing, where the most expensive and disgusting treatments were positioned as the most desirable. What's particularly fascinating is how these alternative treatments influenced Roman social culture beyond just medical practice. Knowledge of exotic ingredient therapy became a form of social currency, where wealthy Romans would casually discuss their treatment experiences as a way of displaying both their sophistication and their financial resources. Dinner party conversations would include detailed comparisons of different animal organ effectiveness, creating a culture where medical discussions functioned as elaborate forms of social competition. You're now traveling across the vast Roman Empire to discover how different regions adapted mouse brain therapy to local conditions, creating a fascinating patchwork of cultural variations on the same fundamentally disgusting theme. The journey begins in the foggy highlands of Roman Britain, where local physicians modified standard mouse brain protocols to account for the region's unique climate, local wildlife, and Celtic cultural influences that persisted despite Roman conquest. In Britannia, you discover that Roman colonists and local Celtic populations developed hybrid approaches to mouse brain therapy that incorporated traditional British folk medicine with Roman medical theory. British practitioners believed that mice caught during the region's frequent rainstorms possessed enhanced moisture balancing properties that were particularly effective for treating breath problems caused by the damp climate. They also incorporated local herbs like bog myrtle and meadowsweet into their brain preparation mixtures, creating regional variations that smelled significantly better than standard Roman treatments, but were probably equally ineffective. The British approach to mouse selection was influenced by local superstitions that had nothing to do with Roman medical theory. Celtic traditions held that certain landscape features contained magical properties, so British physicians preferred mice caught near stone circles, sacred groves, or ancient burial sites. You're witnessing the fusion of Roman pseudoscience with Celtic mysticism, creating treatment protocols that somehow manage to be even more irrational than the original Roman version. Moving south to Roman Spain, you encounter a completely different set of regional adaptations. Spanish physicians, influenced by local traditions of herbal medicine and proximity to North African trade routes, developed mouse brain treatments that incorporated exotic spices and aromatic compounds unavailable in other parts of the empire. Spanish mouse brain therapy typically included cinnamon from India, pepper from the Far East, and aromatic gums from African trees, creating treatments that were simultaneously more pleasant and more expensive than standard Roman procedures. The Spanish regional variation also reflected local dietary preferences and agricultural conditions. Spanish mice were often fed diets supplemented with local olives and wine grape residue, supposedly enhancing their brain's therapeutic properties while creating distinctly Mediterranean flavor profiles. You're observing how regional cuisine influenced medical practices, with Spanish physicians arguing that their regionally specific mouse diets produced superior therapeutic results compared to standard Roman treatments. In Roman Egypt, mouse brain therapy encountered the sophisticated medical traditions of ancient Egyptian civilization, creating hybrid practices that combined Roman theory with Egyptian embalming techniques and religious rituals. Egyptian physicians developed elaborate purification ceremonies that preceded mouse brain application, involving incense burning, ritual washing, and prayers to both Roman and Egyptian medical deities. The brain preparation process incorporated traditional Egyptian preservation methods, creating treatments that could be stored for extended periods without degradation. Historians still argue whether Egyptian modifications to mouse brain therapy represented genuine medical innovation or were simply marketing strategies to appeal to local cultural preferences. But the surviving papyrus records suggest that Egyptian variations were considered superior throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian mouse brain preparations were exported to other provinces, commanding premium prices and establishing Egypt as a center of excellence for exotic medical treatments. The most extreme regional variation developed in Roman North Africa, where proximity to exotic wildlife and established trade connections with sub-Saharan Africa created opportunities for mouse brain alternatives that weren't available elsewhere in the empire. North African physicians experimented with the brain matter of various desert rodents, arguing that animals adapted to harsh climatic conditions possessed enhanced therapeutic properties. You're witnessing medical experimentation that pushed the boundaries of even Roman tolerance for disgusting treatments. North African practitioners also developed seasonal variations based on local climatic conditions. During the hot, dry season, they preferred fresh brain applications that supposedly provided cooling effects. During the brief rainy season, they used preserved brain preparations that were believed to offer warming properties. The regional medical theory held that treatment effectiveness required careful matching between local environmental conditions and preparation methods, creating complex seasonal protocols that had no equivalent in other parts of the empire. In the eastern provinces, particularly in regions that had been part of the Greek cultural sphere, mouse brain therapy encountered sophisticated Greek medical traditions that dated back to Hippocrates and Galen. Greek physicians in Roman territories developed theoretical frameworks that attempted to reconcile mouse brain therapy with classical Greek medical theory, creating elaborate explanations for how rodent neural matter supposedly interacted with the four humors and other traditional Greek medical concepts. The Greek regional approach emphasized systematic observation and documentation, leading to more detailed records of treatment outcomes than existed in other parts of the empire. Greek physicians in Roman territories conducted what they believed to be scientific studies of mouse brain effectiveness, comparing results between different preparation methods and patient populations. You're reading medical documents that apply rigorous methodology to completely bogus treatments, creating sophisticated research protocols around practices that had no basis in medical reality. Perhaps most remarkably, some Greek physicians began developing theoretical criticisms of mouse brain therapy, questioning whether the treatments actually worked and proposing alternative explanations for any positive results that patients reported. These early medical skeptics didn't yet understand that the treatments were completely useless, but they were beginning to apply critical thinking that would eventually lead to more effective medical practices. You're witnessing the birth of evidence-based medicine emerging from debates over rodent brain therapy. The geographic variations in mouse brain therapy reveal how Roman imperial culture functioned as a framework for local adaptation rather than rigid standardization. While the basic concept of mouse brain treatment spread throughout the empire, each region modified the practice to fit local conditions, available resources, and cultural preferences. You're observing how Roman medical practices evolved through cultural exchange, creating a diverse ecosystem of equally useless but regionally distinctive treatments that reflected the complexity of imperial Roman civilization. You're now witnessing the gradual transformation of Roman mouse brain therapy as the empire evolved. Medical knowledge slowly improved, social attitudes toward these practices began to shift in ways that would eventually lead to their abandonment. The scene opens in a Roman medical school during the late 2nd century CE, where younger physicians are beginning to question some of the more extreme treatments that their predecessors had accepted without criticism. This isn't yet the triumph of rational medicine over superstition. That's still centuries away. But you're seeing the first cracks in the theoretical foundation that supported mouse brain therapy. The decline begins with practical concerns rather than scientific insights. As the Roman Empire expanded and became more complex, the logistics of maintaining mouse brain therapy became increasingly difficult. Military campaigns required portable medical treatments that could be administered in the field without elaborate preparation facilities. Provincial administrators needed healthcare solutions that could be implemented without access to specialized suppliers and trained servants. You're observing how the practical demands of imperial administration began to conflict with the elaborate requirements of traditional mouse brain therapy. The economic pressures of the later Roman Empire also contributed to the decline of these expensive treatments. As military expenses increased and tax burdens grew heavier, fewer Roman families could afford the luxury of specialized mouse brain preparations. The extensive servant networks required for proper treatment administration became financially unsustainable for all but the wealthiest aristocratic families. You're witnessing how economic reality began to undermine medical practices that depended on imperial prosperity and social inequality. The evolution of Roman mouse brain therapy during this period involved attempts to simplify and standardize treatments that had become too complex and expensive for widespread use. Physicians developed field-ready versions of mouse brain therapy that could be administered by military medics using local resources and simplified preparation methods. These modified treatments eliminated most of the elaborate ritual elements while retaining what physicians believed to be the essential therapeutic components. You're seeing how military necessity forced the rationalization of irrational medical practices. Historians still argue whether the simplified versions of mouse brain therapy were actually more or less effective than the elaborate original procedures. But since none of them worked at all, the question is essentially meaningless. What's significant is how the simplification process forced physicians to identify which elements of the original treatments they considered most important, revealing the underlying theoretical assumptions that had supported these practices. You're observing the beginning of a process that would eventually lead to more systematic approaches to medical evaluation. The Christian influence on Roman culture also began to affect attitudes toward mouse brain therapy, though not in ways that modern people might expect. Early Christian physicians didn't object to these treatments on scientific grounds. They questioned whether the elaborate rituals and animal sacrifices involved in preparation violated Christian principles about the proper relationship between humans and animals. Some Christian medical texts from this period recommend modified mouse brain treatments that eliminate the ritualistic elements while preserving what they believed to be the purely medical aspects. The geographic periphery of the Roman Empire played a crucial role in the evolution of mouse brain therapy. In frontier regions where Roman medical traditions mixed with local folk practices, physicians developed hybrid treatments that combined elements of mouse brain therapy with traditional local remedies. These hybrid practices often proved more practical and less expensive than pure Roman treatments, leading to gradual adoption of modified approaches throughout the provinces. You're witnessing how cultural exchange at the edges of empire influenced medical practices at the imperial center. The development of alternative medical theories during the later Roman period also contributed to the decline of mouse brain therapy. Some physicians began experimenting with purely herbal approaches to breath treatment, while others focused on dietary modifications and improved oral hygiene practices. These alternative approaches weren't necessarily more scientifically accurate than mouse brain therapy, but they were generally less disgusting and more practical to implement. You're seeing how medical evolution involves the replacement of ineffective treatments with different ineffective treatments that are at least more palatable. The social changes of the later Roman Empire also undermined the cultural foundations that had supported mouse brain therapy. As Roman society became more militarized and focused on practical concerns of imperial defense, the elaborate social rituals that had created demand for exotic breath treatments became less important. Roman dinner parties became less elaborate. Social networking became more focused on military and administrative connections, and the premium placed on perfect breath freshness declined relative to other social concerns. The preservation of mouse brain therapy knowledge during this period reveals how medical traditions can persist even as their practical application declines. Roman medical texts continued to include detailed descriptions of mouse brain treatments long after most physicians had stopped using them regularly. These texts functioned as historical records of traditional practices rather than active medical guidance, preserving knowledge that would influence later medical developments even after the original treatments were abandoned. The transition away from mouse brain therapy wasn't a sudden rejection of irrational medical practices. It was a gradual shift toward different types of irrational medical practices that better suited changing social and economic conditions. Roman physicians didn't develop scientific skepticism about mouse brain therapy. They simply replaced it with other treatments that seemed more practical or theoretically satisfying. You're witnessing medical evolution as a process of substitution rather than improvement, where new forms of pseudoscience replace older forms without necessarily representing progress toward more effective treatments. You're now tracing the surprising persistence of Roman mouse brain therapy concepts through the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and into the medieval period, where these ancient practices evolved into new forms of medical nonsense that influenced European healthcare for another 1,000 years. The scene opens in a monastery scriptorium during the 6th century CE, where monks are carefully copying Roman medical texts that preserve detailed descriptions of mouse brain treatments, alongside genuinely useful information about wound care and herbal medicines. The Islamic conquest of former Roman territories created fascinating opportunities for cultural exchange around medical practices. Arab physicians encountered Roman medical texts that described mouse brain therapy, leading to scholarly debates about whether these treatments were compatible with Islamic religious principles and medical theories. Some Islamic medical authorities dismissed mouse brain therapy as Roman superstition, while others attempted to reconcile these practices with Greek medical texts and their own empirical observations. You're witnessing how cultural conquest and religious conversion influenced the transmission of medical knowledge. The most remarkable aspect of this cultural transmission is how mouse brain therapy concepts survived even when the actual practice was abandoned. Medieval European physicians inherited theoretical frameworks from Roman medicine that emphasized the therapeutic potential of animal neural matter, leading to the development of new treatments that applied similar principles using different animals and preparation methods. Medieval brain therapy typically involved sheep, pigs, or cattle rather than mice, but the underlying theoretical assumptions remained essentially unchanged from Roman practices. The persistence of these concepts in medieval medicine reveals how theoretical frameworks can outlive the specific practices they originally supported. Medieval physicians didn't necessarily believe that mouse brains specifically were therapeutically valuable, but they accepted the broader Roman principle that animal neural matter could transfer beneficial properties to human patients. This led to the development of treatments involving various animal brains, spinal cords, and nervous system tissues that were considered legitimate medical procedures throughout the medieval period. Historians still argue whether medieval brain-based treatments were direct descendants of Roman mouse brain therapy or independent developments based on similar theoretical assumptions. But the textual evidence suggests clear lines of transmission from Roman medical literature through early medieval medical compilations. The theoretical language used to describe these treatments, the classification systems for different animal brain types, and the preparation methods all show clear connections to Roman precedents. University medical schools that emerged during the medieval period institutionalized many concepts that had originated with Roman mouse brain therapy. Medical students learned theoretical frameworks that classified animal organs according to their supposed therapeutic properties, studied preparation methods for various animal-based treatments, and memorized complex systems for matching patient conditions with appropriate animal organ therapies. You're observing how Roman pseudoscience became incorporated into formal medical education that that shaped European healthcare for centuries. The Renaissance period saw a fascinating revival of interest in classical Roman medical texts, leading to renewed scholarly attention to mouse brain therapy and related practices. Renaissance physicians approached these ancient treatments with a combination of classical reverence and emerging empirical skepticism, leading to detailed scholarly commentaries that attempted to reconcile Roman medical practices with contemporary knowledge. Some Renaissance physicians actually attempted to revive mouse brain therapy, believing that classical Roman medicine contained wisdom that had been lost during the medieval period. The printing press revolution made Roman medical texts more widely available, leading to broader dissemination of mouse brain therapy concepts throughout European medical culture. Printed editions of classical medical texts included detailed illustrations of mouse brain extraction techniques, comprehensive charts of optimal preparation methods, and scholarly annotations that attempted to explain these ancient practices to contemporary readers. You're witnessing how technological innovation in publishing helped preserve and spread medical knowledge that was completely worthless. The development of anatomical knowledge during the Renaissance created new theoretical frameworks for understanding why Roman physicians had believed in mouse brain therapy effectiveness. Renaissance anatomists developed detailed explanations for how animal neural matter supposedly interacted with human physiology, creating scientific-sounding justifications for practices that had no actual medical value. These explanations were more sophisticated than original Roman theories, but they were based on the same fundamental misunderstanding of how the human body actually works. The colonial expansion of European powers created opportunities for mouse brain therapy concepts to influence medical practices in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. European physicians brought theoretical frameworks derived from Roman medicine to colonial territories, where these concepts mixed with local medical traditions to create hybrid practices that incorporated elements of ancient Roman brain therapy with indigenous healing methods. You're observing how Roman medical ideas continued to evolve and adapt to new cultural circumstances centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire. The persistence of these concepts into the early modern period reveals how theoretical frameworks can maintain influence even when their original practical applications have been forgotten. European physicians of the 17th and 18th centuries might not have been rubbing mouse brains on their patients' gums, but they were still using theoretical approaches to medicine that had been shaped by Roman ideas about animal organ therapy. The influence of Roman mouse brain therapy concepts can be traced through centuries of European medical development, affecting approaches to treatment that had no obvious connection to the original Roman practices. Perhaps most remarkably, some elements of Roman mouse brain therapy theory actually influenced the development of legitimate medical practices. The Roman emphasis on systematic observation of treatment outcomes, detailed classification of therapeutic substances, and systematic documentation of medical procedures contributed to methodological approaches that eventually supported more effective medical practices. You're witnessing how even completely wrong medical theories can contribute to the development of better research methods and clinical practices. You're now making the final journey through time to discover how the ancient Roman obsession with mouse brain therapy connects to modern anxieties about social acceptance, appearance, and the lengths people will go to gain perceived advantages in competitive social environments. The scene opens in a contemporary cosmetics laboratory where scientists are developing new breath fresheners, teeth whitening systems, and oral hygiene products that promise to give users social and romantic advantages through improved oral presentation. The psychological drivers that led Romans to rub mouse brains on their gums are remarkably similar to the motivations behind modern beauty and hygiene obsessions. Just as Romans lived in constant fear that bad breath would destroy their social standing, modern people spend billions of dollars annually on products that promise to eliminate every possible social disadvantage related to appearance, odor, or personal presentation. You're observing how the fundamental human anxiety about social acceptance creates markets for products and services that promise to eliminate perceived inadequacies. The modern cosmetics industry operates on many of the same principles that supported Roman mouse brain therapy. Contemporary beauty products are marketed with scientific-sounding explanations that are often as dubious as Roman medical theories, sold through social networks that create artificial scarcity and exclusivity, and priced according to psychological rather than actual value. The ingredients in modern cosmetics are certainly safer than mouse brains, but the underlying marketing psychology remains essentially unchanged from Roman practices. What's particularly striking is how modern social media has recreated many of the social pressures that made Roman mouse brain therapy seem necessary. Just as Romans lived in terror of offending potential social connections through inadequate breath freshness, modern people obsess over eliminating every possible flaw that might be noticed and criticized by their online audiences. The Roman dinner party has been replaced by Instagram posts, but the underlying anxiety about social evaluation remains essentially the same. The contemporary wellness industry shows remarkable parallels to Roman approaches to mouse brain therapy. Modern wellness culture promotes expensive treatments that promise comprehensive life improvement through exotic ingredients, elaborate preparation rituals, and exclusive access to specialized knowledge. While modern wellness treatments typically don't involve animal brains, they often incorporate similarly outrageous ingredients and preparation methods that would have seemed familiar to Roman physicians. Historians still argue whether human psychology has fundamentally changed since Roman times, but the persistence of similar social anxieties and marketing approaches suggests that the basic drivers of consumer behavior remain remarkably consistent across cultures and centuries. The specific products and services change, but the underlying human needs for social acceptance, competitive advantage, and perceived control over personal destiny continue to create markets for products that promise more than they can deliver. The modern pharmaceutical industry also demonstrates connections to Roman mouse brain therapy through its approaches to developing and marketing treatments for social anxiety and self-confidence issues. Contemporary medications for social anxiety are marketed with similar promises of improved social performance and enhanced personal charisma that Roman physicians made for mouse brain therapy. The scientific foundation for modern treatments is obviously much stronger, but the marketing psychology appeals to many of the same fundamental human insecurities. The rise of alternative medicine and natural health movements shows how Roman-style medical thinking persists in contemporary culture. Modern alternative medicine practitioners often promote treatments that combine exotic ingredients, elaborate preparation methods, and theoretical frameworks that sound scientific but lack empirical support. While these treatments are generally safer than mouse brain therapy, they appeal to similar psychological needs for unique, personalized healthcare solutions that promise advantages over conventional approaches. The contemporary beauty device industry represents perhaps the closest modern parallel to Roman mouse brain therapy. Modern consumers purchase expensive electronic devices that promise to improve their appearance and social attractiveness through the application of advanced technology to personal grooming. These devices are marketed with scientific-sounding explanations, sold through exclusive distribution networks, and priced according to their promised social benefits rather than their actual effectiveness. The social media influencer economy has created new versions of the Roman servant networks that supported mouse brain therapy. Modern beauty influencers serve similar functions to Roman cosmetic specialists, providing access to exclusive knowledge, specialized products, and social validation for people willing to invest in expensive appearance enhancement routines. The specific products and services have changed, but the underlying social structure remains remarkably similar to Roman practices. As you reflect on this journey through the grotesque world of Roman mouse brain therapy, you're reminded that human nature hasn't changed as much as we might like to believe. The same anxieties, insecurities, and desires for social advantage that drove ancient Romans to rub rodent brains on their gums continue to influence modern consumer behavior, political choices, and social relationships. The methods have evolved, but the underlying psychology remains remarkably consistent across millennia of human civilization. The story of Roman mouse brain therapy serves as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of uncritical acceptance of expert authority and a humbling reminder of how easily intelligent people can be convinced to adopt completely irrational practices. As you consider your own daily routines, consumer choices, and social anxieties, you might wonder which of your current practices will seem as absurd to future generations as mouse brain therapy seems to us today. And so, we reach the end of our strange journey through the aromatic world of ancient Roman dental care, where desperate social climbers rubbed mouse brains on their gums in pursuit of the perfect breath. As you settle deeper into your pillow, let these images fade gently from your mind. The marble tables covered with surgical instruments, the tiny jars filled with glistening brain matter, the elaborate preparation rituals that consumed entire afternoons in pursuit of social perfection. Perhaps there's something oddly comforting in knowing that people 2,000 years ago were just as anxious about their social standing as we are today. They worried about making good impressions at dinner parties. They invested ridiculous amounts of time and money in appearance enhancement, and they were willing to believe almost anything that promised to give them an edge in competitive social situations. The specific methods were different, but the underlying human concerns remain remarkably familiar. As you drift toward sleep, you might find yourself grateful for modern toothpaste, dental floss, and breath mints, simple, effective solutions that accomplish what Romans spent fortunes trying to achieve with rodent neurology. The next time you feel anxious about your appearance or social performance, remember that you're participating in a tradition that stretches back through millennia of human civilization, connecting you to countless generations of people who shared your concerns about acceptance, attraction, and social success. Let the gentle rhythm of your breathing slow as you imagine those long-vanished Roman dinner parties where guests reclined on cushioned couches, sharing wine and conversation, while secretly worrying whether their mouse brain preparations were holding up under social scrutiny. Their world has faded into dust, but their very human anxieties echo softly across the centuries, reminding us that we're all part of the same ongoing human story of hope, fear, and the eternal quest for belonging. Sleep well, knowing that whatever tomorrow's social challenges might bring, they're unlikely to require any rodent brain matter whatsoever.